Well, hello. Welcome, good to see you all. Did you have a good spring break? Did y'all go to Florida, get your tans all worked on? Or partying, or whatever you guys do down there, you wild people, I know. I had a very great spring break. Let me see if I can find it here. Wait. Oh. Hit play? Oh. Oh. Let's just spend some time here looking at this. That's Angela, my new fiancée. March 16th, I go out and get up on this terrace overlooking the Grand Canal in Venice, and I got on one knee and proposed to her, and she said yes. Yeah, so anyway, thank you. My life's going great, but that's not about me, although it really is, this whole thing. All right. I just want to say thank you for being here today. As you can tell, a very special day. We have five representatives from, not four, five major religions to talk about a very interesting question, and to moderate the whole conversation is a friend of mine, a person you want to get to know from your community, Don Barkley, the Reverend Don Barkley, and I'd like to introduce him for you. Reverend Don Barkley is the Orange County Area Director for Search, a nonprofit Christian organization. Search was founded in 1978 to provide people of diverse worldviews safe settings for discussion of spiritual topics. Don has led hundreds of discussions in homes, businesses, country clubs, and colleges, as well as on recreational retreats, on ski mountains, at tennis clubs, or by fishing rivers. For several years, Don served on the board of the Alliance for Spiritual Community, an interfaith movement providing educational events, including the Religious Diversity Fair at San Juan Capistrano Catholic Mission and the University of California, Irvine. He also leads weekly open forums at local treatment centers for alcohol and chemical dependency. Don is responsible for continued education training of Search's staff of 50 members. He has degrees from Wheaton College and Dallas Theological Seminary, and is author of a forthcoming book called The Hopeful Mind. Don and his wife Ann live in Mission Viejo and have 4 adult children. Let's welcome Don Barkley.
Great to see you. This is fun. This is great. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that great introduction. He left out the see me parts. I understand you know Greg well, and isn't that neat to finally see him find the woman of his dreams and she the man of hers. It's great to see. I'm going to lower the mic just a bit. We are doing a panel today, and Greg is right, 5, not 4. So you get your money's worth today. And we're just so glad to have these panelists with us. Part of my job today is to introduce them. I'll do that in a second. And then I'll be asking the questions. And you know, the reason we're doing this is, a topic like God, ultimate reality, talk about foundational, right? And we're not supposed to talk about this stuff in polite society, nor politics. In this day and age, I think this is probably a safer subject, though. To talk about God and to really listen, that's what we're about. What I'm going to be doing is asking them questions, and that's what I do a lot of. I think one thing that we might learn today is that when you hear, for instance, Buddhist or Muslim or Christian, we have this a picture in our mind or a set of beliefs in our mind, and I think sometimes, most of the time, I'm wrong. My first next step usually is best to be, tell me what that means to you. What do you mean by Buddhist? What do you mean by Christian? What do you mean by Hindu? And to listen to the person. And that's what we're going to do today. And I think we'll learn something. And that's the goal. If we walk out saying, I didn't know that. That was really interesting. Of course, you'll have time to ask some questions at the end, and Dr. Jenks will lead that. question time. You're welcome to come up afterwards, as I know it's kind of the way of your people to come up afterwards and talk to the panelists, which is great. And I'm just so glad to see you all. And I wish I could get to know you all better. My parents live in Laguna Woods. They love it. And I just know that out here we're looking at people with families, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, careers in various professions. You bring a wealth of knowledge, and we know that your questions will be wonderful. So let's get started. I want to say one thing. The topic of God, I don't know that there's a more interesting, more engaging, more mysterious, or more important topic than who is God. And so as we get started, before I ask questions, I want you to be able to know a little bit about each of our panelists. And I'm getting to know them, and I have a feeling this won't be the last time that we'll be over coffee together or on a panel or a group or a stage like this. And I hope that's the case. So again, thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Let me start the introductions. And I'm going to say Swami D's name one time, the whole name. He is a gracious, kind man and doesn't make us say the whole name. It's a beautiful name, and he told me what it means. But Swami Dhyana Yoga Ananda is here with us. You can call me Don, by the way, and you can call him Swami D, okay? And let me say something first of all. He's a Hindu monk. If you know about the monastery in Trabuco Canyon, he is a monk of the Ramakrishna Order. The Ramakrishna Order is a worldwide monastic organization founded in 1886 by Swami Vivekananda, who achieved worldwide recognition as an articulate spokesman for Vedanta and Hinduism at the first World Parliament of Religions, Chicago, in 1893. The core of this organization is known as Ramakrishna Movement or Vedanta Movement, which aims at the harmony of religions, harmony of the East and the West, harmony of the ancient and the modern, spiritual fulfillment, social equality, and peace for all humanity without any distinctions of creed, caste, race, or nationality. Swami D was born in the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and joined the monastic order in 2001. He received his monastic training in India, where he lived for 7 years. And as I said, he's presently the presiding Swami at Ramakrishna Monastery in Trabuco Canyon. Welcome with me, Swami D.
Thank you very much, Don.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And I'm going to introduce Wendy, too. Thank you. I'll give you a chance. Hold on. Yeah. You know, one thing about this group, the problem won't be getting them to say something. It'll be getting them to be quiet. And I think that's great. Time will, I think, really fly. And so I've got to get on with this. Wendy, we're so glad you're here. Wendy Block. Wendy Block is a senior teacher at Insight LA, a Southern California nonprofit organization dedicated to meditation and Buddhist studies. She has been teaching meditation and Buddhist studies for the past 9 years in Long Beach and Orange County. She completed the dedicated practitioner program at Spirit Rock in Theravada Buddhism and has completed teacher training programs at Insight LA. Her primary teachers are Trudy Goodman and Victor Bird. In July of 2017, she received teacher authorization in the Theravadan tradition from Sharon Salzberg and Trudy Goodman. Wendy has taught multiple classes in meditation and Buddhist psychology and gives weekly talks in the Long Beach, Orange County areas. She's been a practicing psychotherapist and licensed clinical social worker for over 30 years. Wendy has integrated her teachings on meditation with her work in psychotherapy. So welcome with me, Wendy N. Block. Rabbi Kavod Weider is with us today. Thanks for being here, Kavod. Rabbi Weider is a rabbi at Temple Bethel of South Orange County, which is in Los Alisos, nearby. Aliso Viejo, rather. Aliso Viejo. There's too many Alisos and Viejos in this area, aren't there? In Aliso Viejo. He is a native of Orange County. Kavod received his BA in psychology and then an MA in transpersonal psychology counseling from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in 1996. He completed his rabbinic studies at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles and was ordained as a conservative rabbi on May 21st, 2012. He is a father and a husband to his wife, Ilana Rogel Weider, father of Levi, Aiden, and Aviv. Welcome with me, Rabbi Kavod. Dr. Richard Park, sometimes called Rich, sometimes called Dr. Park, is a person that I found just recently that we had already met, and we didn't know it. And we have a longtime friend that is a mutual friend of ours. And so glad that you're here, Dr. Park. Richard S. Park is assistant professor of theology and ethics at Vanguard University, a Christian liberal arts university in Costa Mesa, California. You might know of it. He is also the founder and president of the Renaissance Group, a nonprofit organization aimed at helping people find their life's calling. He has several publications, including his first book, Constructing Civility, published by the University of Notre Dame Press. And as I found out, it came out of his doctoral work at Oxford on the same subject. So he's gone through the torture of getting a degree there, which made also just him a great fit for this group. And I know that you'll enjoy him. He is deeply passionate about connecting calling, culture, and character. Dr. Park completed his doctoral work in Muslim-Christian relations and in Oxford, and he is a Southern California native, lives with his wife in Orange County, California. Welcome with me, Dr. Richard Park. And Tariq Atta is one of my neighbors, lives very close to where we live in Mission Viejo. We've gotten to know each other some, and I hope it's not the end of this, Tariq.
Of course.
Did that sound ominous? Like, yeah, this may be the last time we can. No, I was at a group this morning and came from there, just a block away from the mosque where he is the imam. So really, especially glad to meet him finally and have him here. Tariq Atta was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago, where he attained a BA in psychology. After graduating, he traveled to Jordan, where he spent 7 years studying the Islamic sciences and earned a BA and an MA in Islamic jurisprudence. Now he serves as the religious leader of the Orange County Islamic Foundation in Mission Viejo and serves on the Interfaith Council of Greater Rancho Santa Margarita. He also has a wife who he met in Jordan, another thing he got in Jordan besides a degree, and has a 14-month-old son. And we're so thrilled to have him here. Welcome, Tariq Atta.
Thank you.
Now let me start with the questions, all right? And we'll get this going. At about 11 o'clock, we'll turn it to Q&A over to Dr. Jenks. But let's start with the kind of the most obvious question, which might to you seem, we already know. But the question is, in 3 or 4 minutes, which is, it's not that big a subject, so, in 3 or 4 minutes, summarize your concept of the divine. In other words, according to the religious tradition you are representing, what or who is God, or what is ultimate reality to you? And I'm going to start at this side, and I warned Swami D that he would be first, I think. And we'll just move down. And so, Swami D, how would you answer that question?
Well, 4 minutes to answer a fundamental question. It's not so easy. Well, first of all, the divine. I like that word. According to our tradition, which goes very, very, it's very ancient. It is said that each one of us, each soul, is essentially, potentially divine, divinity. And the goal of life is to manifest, to express that divinity in every single thing we do in our life. That's the goal, to express ourselves as divine beings. How do we do that? By getting hold of ourselves. Getting hold of our mind by controlling our mind, the inner and external world, by understanding our relationship with the world, how we relate with it. by being in control, and by doing that, just be divine beings. So that's not just to say, that's not something that you read on books. These were revelations experienced by ancient rishis or seers of the truth in ancient times. We don't know exactly when. People talk about 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago. The fact is that this is experience. And the heritage that we have is these teachings. So it's up to us to embrace this and to practice this in our life. How? We have to get hold of ourselves. We are used to go outside. We are used to experience the world. No one taught us how to go within and tap into our inner self, which is of the nature of divinity. Now, divinity can be expressed through what we call Brahman, or in other words, G-O-D, God. Now, God cannot be expressed in words, cannot be defined. If we define God, we kill him. God is infinite, cannot be expressed in words. We cannot limit him. God can be experienced. So this God is of the nature of knowledge, absolute, sat, existence, awareness, absolute, chit, and ananda, bliss, eternal absolute bliss. That's who we are. That's divinity.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Wendy, it's your turn.
So the Buddha was known as Siddhartha Gautama, and he was alive in the 6th century BC before Christ. And he was a wealthy, born to a noble family. His father was a king and lived a very sheltered life. And the story goes that he came out of the castle, or this beautiful compound of wealth and luxury, and stood at the gates of this compound and saw, some of you could answer this and know it, right? He saw an old person, a sick person, a corpse, and a mendicant. And that took him on a journey. He left the wealth behind, put on a cloth, and walked around for, I think it was about 6 or 8 years. I have to look. But the point is that he never wrote about the concept of God. There's nothing in the Theravadan writings, no concept anywhere of God. And when he lived, there were, in Nepal, there were many gods, and people would worship many different gods. What he did write about was the fact that people would go to temples and shrines and statues and do all these rituals, these elaborate rituals, to get more out of life, or to get life to be better for them and to be better people. And this is what he wrote about. It's not the ritual that makes you a better person or an enlightened person or gets you away from suffering. He sat under a tree for, I think, 24 hours, if I remember this correctly, to awaken, and then he became enlightened, or the awakened one. We say the Tathagata. And what he's referring to is that he discovered through meditation that there is a path and a way out of suffering. And that path is what he writes about and has us focus on. And it is a path of 1, meditation, 2, morality and ethics, 3, wisdom. It's a path of wisdom and learning and understanding our illusions and delusions. And the fourth one is loving kindness and compassion, service and love for all beings, care of all beings. And that for him is the path to enlightenment. The concept of one God did not exist in the time of the Buddha. So nowhere in the writings could we describe what God is. But what we could bring you to is a very interesting question, and that is, who is asking about God? And what is the reason for it? So the Buddha looks at the nature of mind, the nature of self, and the tendencies and habits we fall into. And he asks, why are you asking? And this inquiry, this investigation, is part of the path of enlightenment, to know oneself deeply and the motivation behind your question. And this is the study. And as this unfolds for you, we become and we understand the truth of who we are and how we awaken in the way that he outlined for us.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. Rabbi Kavod, who is the divine?
First, just a pleasure to be with you all this morning. One of the things that is a little bit of a misconception is that the Torah, or the 5 books of Moses itself, is what defines God for Judaism. And as we know, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Old Testament, is a sacred scripture for different religions, not just for Judaism. And how each tradition reads that scripture is a lot of what defines it as its unique expression. So for Judaism, it's really how the rabbis, starting in the 1st century, throughout time, all the way up into modern period, have read and understood the Torah. So while in the Bible, God is represented as, it's a story, and God is a character in the story, along with all of the other characters. The way that the rabbis, much later, hundreds of years later, understood that character is that it cannot be defined by a concept or a name or anything that we can wrap our heads around as human beings. So as it appears in the text, God is spelled out with the Hebrew words Yud He Vav He, which cannot be, there's no vowels to it, it can't be pronounced. And so when we read that in prayer or in scripture, we use the word Adonai as the name for God. But there's an awareness that that's not the reality. The name is not the reality. The concept is not the reality. So what is the reality? And that's something that we can, any words that we give, any concept that we give, anything is not true. It's going to fall short of that infinite presence that was spoken about earlier. And so the question then is, okay, so I can't really accurately talk about or think about. The only thing I can do is to live that reality, is in some way to have every part of my life be the choices, the things I say, the way that I am in the world reflect something that's deep, something that's sacred, something that is, now I'm going to start to use words to try to get to this, something that is the source of life, of all being, something that is the animating presence in every cell in our body, in every molecule, in everything from the farthest reaches of outer space to inner space, that somehow there is a presence. And the piece of how the text, the story represents it accurately, is that there is a presence. This is not an impersonal world that we live in. that there is something that has intelligence, that is present, that is the foundation of all of us and what we do. And so the more that we can become aware of, in an experiential way, what that presence is, the more that it can inform our choices, our actions, our decisions, so that we are radiating that presence. We are the ones that are bringing this mystery of God into the world.
Thank you, Rabbi Kavod. Dr. Park.
All right. It's also a real privilege for me to be here with you and the panel as well. I'm just going to apologize in advance. I've actually developed a little bit of a hearing issue. Out of my left ear, it's a recent flight and a number of other things, and so I can hear this side of the panel just fine. But but if there are any hard questions that come from you, I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear it. So I'm just letting you know. But actually, so 3-4 decades of my life thinking about this to 3-4 minutes. So here's my thought on how would I define God. I'm a teacher, so I like to alliterate, so it's easy to remember. But the way I think of it is, first, for the Christian, I believe, he is a Trinity. So God is Trinitarian. That means 3 persons and 1 being. That would be illogical if it were 3 persons and one person, or 3 beings and 1 being. But the doctrine states that it's 3 persons and 1 being. Kind of like you can have 3 family members and yet 1 family unit. So there's 3 persons yet 1 being. Sorry if I'm getting a little academic there, but just to kind of get precise on that notion of the Trinity. So 3 persons and 1 being. The second thing is he's transcendent. Christian theologians talk about God as being transcendent, but also immanent. So he is sovereign over the universe, yet he's right in our hearts. There's some resonances there, I think, within various traditions we've heard already. So he's truly in our hearts. He's immanent. He's close by, but he's also transcendent over the universe. He is in control of the universe, but he's also intimate with our lives. And the third thing is, if I were to have to do this in a short time, is that he's trustworthy. He is personable, because God is a person. In fact, he's 3 persons, I believe. He is personable, he's reliable, he's trustworthy. He actually is interested in our communication with God, our prayers, the affairs of our lives. He's watched us from the beginning of our lives, and he will watch us to the end of our lives. And so this is my take. And so with that, so he's Trinitarian, he's transcendent yet immanent, but he's also trustworthy. And I do believe that Christ is the fullest expression of the divine. Christ is fully divine, he's God, but he's fully human, so he's with us. He has a nature like ours. He's able to sympathize with our struggles and our successes. And so that'd be the short of it, I guess.
Thank you, Dr. Park. You all are very good panelists. And from the moderator's standpoint, that I haven't had to flag you down or anything, you are great. And it's really a difficult task to do what you're doing. So I really respect what you're doing. Tariq, it's your turn. What is the divine to you?
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, especially on such a beautiful topic. For us, looking at our book, the Quran, it very well tells us who God is. There's over 1,000 verses, out of the 6,000 plus verses, that elaborate some aspect of who God is. And perhaps one of the most concise definitions, or not a definition, but concise descriptions of who God is a quote the Quran gives of Moses talking to the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh asks him, who is God? And he says, God is the one who created everything the way it is, gave it its shape, its form, and then guided it, made it what it is. So a bee is a bee. A human is a human. And you can write a book just on this verse, and because there are many elements to it. And just elaborate on what that means and what that's telling us and how important that is in our daily lives. We can look at the name Allah. So the name Allah, which is the Arabic equivalent of God. So when you open the Arabic Bible, you'll find that God is referred to as Allah. If you look at the etymology of this word, it really elaborates who God is. And that is, pre-Islamic times, the Arabs would use this verb, alaha, to refer to a baby camel, what it does as soon as it's born. So if we've all seen National Geographic, Discovery Channel. We all see that deer when it's first born and it starts jumping around. The first thing it does, it goes to its mom. Why? Because it knows, it realizes that everything and anything it needs is with its mom. So the mom will protect it. The mom will feed it. The mom will nourish it, give it love and care. So they use this verb to refer to this relationship between the baby camel and its mother. And then they use this word to refer to the concept of worship. That which you worship, there is this relationship between the individual and that which is being worshipped. Because a person worships something or someone, right, whatever it may be, because they believe there's this connection. This deity can provide me with what I need. For us, that is the creator, the one who created everything, the one who created you and me, the one who created Adam and all the prophets, and created the earth and all its wonders. And the relationship between the individual and the creator is that we see the creator as being the one who provides us with everything we need. Anything we need, we find it with him. If we are feeling, grief, well, he can cheer us up. If we are feeling, stress, well, he can alleviate that for us. If we are in need, you can ask him and he will provide that. So it's this strong relationship between the individual and God. That's how we see who God is. But ultimately, he is the creator, he is the ultimate authority, and he is the one who is managing the universe.
Thank you so much. Good job. The next question has to do with a specific attribute of the divine, which is often discussed. And I'm eager to hear what the answers are to this, as the panelists know. And by the way, they see the questions ahead of time. They have had time to think about it. I think they would do well if they didn't see the questions ahead of time. But just so you know, I'm not throwing them any surprises. I might here and there, but so far there are none. The second question that they see is, and this, if we could keep it to just a summary, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. How did you personally arrive where you are? Tell your story of how you came to embrace your spiritual path that you claim as your own now. So, Tariq, would you start for this time at the other end,
Sure.
and we'll go back the other way.
Sure. So I was born in a Muslim family, a practicing family. Both my parents were practicing Muslims, still are. And our community was actually quite large. So I had that nourishment, the upbringing. I went to the dreaded Sunday school. I had all of that. But it wasn't until my freshman year in college where I actually became interested in learning about the faith and not just being, a Muslim. And to me, when I started listening to the knowledge, listening to the information, I saw what the religion can provide me. It's more than just a concept in the mind, rather it's an experience, as we've been hearing this word quite a bit. You can experience it. It can empower you. And that was quite important to me. Being a millennial, this Generation Z as they're calling it, they're going through what's called an existential vacuum, this feeling that there is no purpose, there's no meaning to life. And perhaps I got the lesser end of that, but there was still this feeling that, okay, what's the point of all of this? And I felt that faith, knowledge, was able to answer that question for me and give me something to live my life by. I no longer needed to think, what am I going to do today? Well, I have 1,000 things I could do today. I can choose which one I want. And religion really helps alleviate boredom. So when you study psychology, and I have a BA in psychology, and I still research some of these concepts, religion plays a major role in dealing with boredom. And that's important from a psychological perspective. So that's how I became introduced to the faith. It was through scholarship, it was through knowledge, and then I continued that path of scholarship and knowledge till this day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Wonderful.
So I think mine is kind of an interesting story in that it's not very typical. I was actually born into a Mormon family, believe it or not. My father was a Mormon minister and sort of a branch president not too far from here in North Orange County. And so that was until I was 10. And so I actually remember a lot of my upbringing that way. My sisters and I still talk about it. But at some point, my mom was converted first. 2 weeks later, my dad was converted and to Christian faith. And since then, my father's become a Christian minister. But I went from that, this is like early elementary years, to then a time in college where I went through a very deep time of doubt. I went to Barkley. It was just, we like to call it UC Berkeley, because there was a lot of, it was just, and from the 60s to the time I was there in the 90s to even now, but I think what I experienced was this deep time of doubt, because I began to question my faith and think, did I just inherit this faith in the same way I've inherited my genes from my parents or this sort of thing? And so I really began to wonder whether it was my own and whether it was authentic. And so I went through about a 10-month period of deep doubt. I mean, this was, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, if you remember those days where you would stay with your college friends and ask these deep questions. But mine was so existential. I began to literally feel it in my bones. I couldn't go to sleep. My friends had midterms the next day, and they were studying for their questions. And I said, I've got a question about life and death here. You need to help me, And so it was a very deep, dark time. But in the middle of it, I did say, God, if you're out there and you get me through this, I want to live my life. I want to serve you. I want to do whatever it takes to not let other people have to fall into this deep place. And so that's kind of what's, so sure enough, after doing some searching through books and all kinds of things, science and history and philosophy, I did come back to faith, but it was, as you might imagine, I had some intellectual questions answered, but really it was a spiritual re-encounter with God. I was kneeling in front of a cross at a retreat. Sounds very typical, but I was at a retreat kneeling, and for 3 hours I just kind of had an ultimatum: God, either you show up and I experience you as being real, or I can't go on. This is really torturing. This is like living a nightmare. And so sure enough, at that time, I believe Jesus showed up in such a powerful way that he was more real than the back of my hand. And from that time, I've done my best to live with God and live for God. And so since then, it's just been an adventure. I've gotten a chance to do all sorts of incredible things with and for the Lord. And there's also been a lot of struggle. And I think there's some questions to that a little bit later. But I believe one thing that my faith does, it helps me realize that as great life gets and as terrible as life gets, the gospel is that there's always redemption, there's always hope, there's always someone who's interested in your life, and that's God. So that's my short story.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Kavod.
So I love this question, because I think that this question really, we're all on a journey. We're all of us are on a journey, and being able to share personally is just makes it real. So for me, I didn't really, in my growing up, I grew up in a Jewish household. We were, I would say that my core experience of what Judaism, and I wouldn't even say God of this, was all about, because I never thought about it that way, was on Friday nights we would have, and my family, we'd have a Shabbat dinner, which is a special meal with a few blessings and candles. And then after we'd finish, we would all pile in my parents' bed and watch Dallas and Falcon Crest. and it was warmth, closeness, family, and connection. And it planted this seed in me. The word God or the idea of God wasn't a part of it, but as I look back now, that was an experience of God that I had, that I wouldn't call it that at that moment. And I went through, I started to go through Hebrew school, as Tariq said, the dreaded Sunday school. I was a Hebrew school dropout. I had no connection with any of the stuff, all these ideas about God and Bible stories and all that stuff didn't stick on me. As soon as I became a teenager, I had a bar mitzvah, kind of like a whole bar mitzvah, but not in the context of a synagogue. It was in our backyard. And then I didn't want to have anything else to do with Judaism, with God, with any of that. And when I was 17 years old, I was with a friend in Laguna Beach. We were walking around in the tide pools and sitting and journaling in my last year of high school. And I just had a moment of experience. And all I can describe with is experience of presence. And suddenly everything, the ocean, me, the sky, all of it was one expression of this presence, and I was a part of that expression. And it was what I would call it is an awakening experience. It was almost like my eyes were open to all the ways that I thought life was all about, in my 17-year-old mind, and all of those things. None of that was real or true. It was only ideas that I had been taught about how the world works and how I work and all of that, and what was real was the truth of that moment of presence, of connection. And it just became from that moment on, I wanted to live that experience. I wanted to go deeper into that experience, to that truth. That was the only truth that I had ever. So that kind of led me into pathways of meditation, of yoga, and the more that I went deeper into that through my college age, I started to have these experiences of prayers that I hadn't heard coming up through me from my bar mitzvah when I was 13, in silence, as I started to have these visions of ancestors kind of looking at me from hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, looking almost, this was the visions, looking at me here in the future and say, it's finally time you came home. And whatever the mystery of that experience was, how it unfolded for me is there is something about who I am as being part of this Jewish people that I can't deny. It's just in me. And it's been waiting. And that's one of the things that's an interesting piece about Judaism, because while there's theology and there's religion, a core aspect of Judaism is being part of a people that lives this a tribe, in the same way that Native American are a tribe connected to land, connected to culture, connected to religion. So somehow it was undeniable at this moment. And that brought me onto wanting to learn everything that I could about my history, tradition. And what I found, the deeper I went in, is that it absolutely addressed in the most direct and deepest way that I could imagine this experience that I had when I was 17, and this reality of God, and how I could make that not just an idea, but an intimate part of my life.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Wendy.
So I was born in a Jewish household, similar to you. I'm glad we're following. And when I was about 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, somewhere in there, my parents sat me down over a bowl of cereal for breakfast. And my parents were really religious and philosophical seekers. We weren't raised necessarily with Jewish religion, but with a Jewish identity and culture. And they were very proud of being Jewish, as you were pointing to. But they were really searching, and they searched all the world's religions and all the different philosophical, and they drew this conclusion. They said there were 3 things in life that are most important for you to do. 1, become awakened and know the nature of enlightenment, study meditation. That was 1. 2, go to college. Get a career, a job, right? They said that. And 3, marry a Jewish man. And I was very obedient. I can't say I'm awakened, But they meditated, and they gave me the opportunity to learn meditation, take meditation classes. And my motivation for being here today and being in practice of Buddhism, and I still identify as a Jewish person and enjoy Jewish life as well, is my fascination with meditation. It bit me, there's something about sitting quietly, eyes closed, the mind becoming still, without thought. When thought ceases, there is really a tapping of an ocean of love, a beautiful love. And it's a love that's boundless, and the Buddha talks about that. It's a love for all beings, and it's palpable. One can feel and sense that through the practice of meditation. And so I've been a devoted meditator all my life, studying many different traditions in many different places. And I would say for the last 10 years, 15 years, stayed with Buddhism, particularly becoming fascinated by the Buddha's description of the mind and consciousness, of awareness itself. And we call it, very popularly, we call it mindfulness now. Sometimes I like to call it Mick-mindfulness. It's everywhere. Get your hamburger mindfully, right? But it's a very deep study that takes years and years, and particularly the Satipatthana Sutta, written by Analayo. I mean, you could study this your whole life. It's very deep and fascinating, and there's a great unfolding leading to peace, tranquility, wisdom, right action, good ethics, and kindness. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Wendy. That's great.
Well, how did I get here? In my spiritual path. Well, I didn't tell you, but I was raised Roman Catholic. I was born in a Catholic family, and I went to a Catholic school, and I think I was always seeking for meaning. I've been looking for answers to these fundamental questions of life. And it wasn't until I was 18 years old that I decided to start my journey, to start, consciously looking for answers. In the religion I was born, I am extremely grateful, and as Wendy says, she still identifies herself with Judaism. In a way, I think I still identify myself with Jesus completely, because I love him. And what happens is I'm extremely grateful to the Christianity, because they taught me how to go within through prayer. And that is something that I could reconnect later in my life when I discovered this ancient philosophy. We call it Vedanta. Veda means knowledge. Anta means the end of knowledge. That talks about pretty much who we are, and our identity with God. So, as I said, that's how I started. And I was 18, 19 years old, and 9 years later, I decided to completely embrace my spiritual journey full-time by becoming a monk. That's pretty much all. I can
Wonderful.
go on. I can go on. But
Thank you. I know you can. I'll tell you, your self-control is wonderful, all of you. Thank you. This next question has to do with a little bit more about the nature of God or the divine. There are categories that we as human beings have to have. We use language, and we're sort of stuck with it, aren't we? We're stuck with things like pronouns and he, she, it. And we don't have much else in the toolbox regarding that. So my question is regarding the nature of God specifically. Do you see God, the divine, as someone, or something. And what I mean by that, the someone would be someone that one could have a personal relationship with, that would have the capacity to love us or to be intelligent. And sometimes religions define themselves as either as dualists in this sense, that there's a creator and there's the creature, the creation. So my question is, would you address that issue? How do you see God as first of all, as personal or impersonal, kind of more like a great force or essence, but not person? Or do you see God as more something grand and mysterious and beautiful, but not so much someone? And I'd like you to talk about that, because as we talk about relating, I think the next questions will have to do with how, and you've already mentioned these things, and before and I'll give you a chance to think about that for a second, I would just like to say, wasn't this last round wonderful to hear their stories? I love, and in subjects like this, where we have often some very strong, deep-rooted feelings and strong senses of identity here, wouldn't it be wonderful if someone were to ask you, tell me your story, and just listen? And we can do that for each other. And maybe there'll be a time this week where you'll meet a person, you'll talk to a person. I know that they are of this camp or this belief. I think I know what they mean, but I've never really asked them, tell me your story. So anyway, how wonderful it was just to hear their stories. And thank you so much for being so personal and candid about your experience. So let's start here with Swami D, if you would. The question about the nature of God, particularly as to the personality or personhood, or the not personality or personhood of God.
Okay. How many people are we here present right now? About probably 150 people. 150 different ways of defining God and seeing God. God is very personal to us when it comes to our definition and how we address to God. We all have a relationship with Him somehow, knowingly or unknowingly. God can be both personal and impersonal. Seeing God from the universe, we talk about the personal God, the Creator, that who is there, harmonizing all the universal laws and putting everything in rhythm, keeping everything in rhythm. Now, the impersonal God is mostly the approach of our way of life, which is, it's a principle. It's based on a principle. So, from the personal point of view, the difference between what we call God and each and every one of us is not in essence, but in degree of manifestation. That's why we have human beings with personalities like Jesus and many other world teachers like Buddha and many others, who could express that godness in their life by purifying themselves to the maximum. There you have it. Personalities, God personality, living gods on earth. That's also up to us to start embracing that idea of God through a personality as a symbol, so that we can connect with ourselves and come back to ourselves. That's how we can have a personality. God expresses Himself through us, each and every one of us. And the more we expand, the more we integrate each other, the more compassion we experience in our life, the more we live in Him.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as I mentioned earlier, the Buddha did not teach about God, and there are no writings in the Theravadan scriptures about God. What he talked about was the awakened person, how to awaken. And so he discusses the qualities of an awakened person. And essentially, someone who's practicing and has awakened has abundant love and care for all beings and practices no harm, has a deep, abiding love, and also awakens to the marks of existence, the truth of the way things are, the truth of our lives, which is impermanent. We're all impermanent. All of us are on the same train going to impermanence. We're all not going to be here at some point. Everything in this world, from this table to my hand to this water, it's all impermanent and constantly changing. And he also taught that to be born is to feel stress and suffering, that in life there's joy and there's suffering, and we cannot get away from the fact that our everyday lives carry stress and things we don't like. And the way we deal with that, the way we work with this difficulty is significant and important to our development. And the most difficult concept that he talked about is the concept of not self. He didn't say no self, which a lot of people think, so then you get the joke, well, if I'm not a self, whose arthritis is this? Right? He said, yeah, it's a Jewish joke. He said, he said, not self. So it's an inquiry into who do you take yourself to be. We are not a fixed, solid self in Buddhism, and we live under a lot of illusions about who we think we are. So it becomes an inquiry and a questioning into who we think we are. And I'll end here.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Kavod.
So on one level, Swami D was saying impersonal and personal. On one level, if we're speaking about kind of the ultimate nature of reality in some way, the source of being, then how does one have a relationship with that? And I think it's just really important to note that everything that we think or experience happens through our humanity. That we are wired in a certain way, and we see the world through the way that our brains are structured, all of this. So when we approach the world, even to the most intimate questions of significance and reality in life, we're doing it through the language and the experience that we know. That's part of our human experience. And really what I think defines our human experience most fundamentally is relationship. That we are connected to each other, to all of life. We operate, and everything that goes around we see within a context of relationship. That's how we live, that's how we move forward. So that being said, it makes every bit of sense that the way that we have connection and knowledge and awareness of the ultimate source of life, of ourselves, of all of it, can only happen through relationship. So we have to have it with a personal God. We have to have it with relationship. And I say we have to. If we want to be connected in life in general, that happens through relationship with something. So then what do we do with the fact that we're saying, okay, if I want to have a connection, an awakening, an awareness of the ultimate source of all life, it has to happen through relationship, which means there has to be someone, something to relate to. And yet what you're talking about, that someone, something, mystery, cannot be talked about, cannot be spoken about, is beyond. How does that happen? And the only thing I can, the way that I can think about this is to think about our current relationships, because the only way I can think about God is through my own experience in my life. And I think one of the biggest disservices that we can do to any of our relationships with our spouses, with our parents, with our children, is to say, I know you. I know you. To basically, we have this beloved person in front of us, this who is an ever-evolving, ever-changing experience, being that's happening, and immediately we want to put a label around them and say, I know who you are. You're this way. And as long as I'm having a relationship to my idea of who you are, instead of open to you as an ever-unfolding mystery that is always changing, then I am not really in relationship with you. I'm in relationship with my idea of you. And if I'm in relationship with my idea of you, I'm not going to really listen to you that well, because as soon as you start talking, I already know what you're going to say. I'm going to make assumptions about what you see and think and all of that, and you're there, but in some ways we're what the philosopher Martin Buber calls, I'm having an I-it relationship. I've objectified you in some way, and I know that's kind of a harsh way to say it, but if who you are is my idea of you, that idea is an object, not a living, unfolding presence. Same thing with God. Because God is everything, people, all of it. If I have a relationship with some idea that I have in my head of what God is, I'm relating as an object. So how can I live in the moment with a sense that there is mystery to this moment? There is depth that I'm not aware of, that I can be surprised by life, that nothing falls into my little labels and categories, but instead be open to this mystery that we're calling God, and to have a real relationship with that, in the same way that I have a real relationship with my wife and my kids. That's that place between where it's all personal, all of it's personal, and at the same time, it's not personal in a way that's defined by my categories.
Thank you.
Perhaps I can answer this question of whether God is a something or someone or personal or impersonal by continuing a bit of the story of when I was at Berkeley. Of all the scientific and historical and philosophical questions that I was wrestling with for these 10 months or so, the one question that really bothered me the most, I think the heart of it was really this: how is it that some Jewish man on the other side of the earth 2,000 years ago, dying on a Roman crucifix, have anything to do with me and my salvation? That was a very odd thing, that some guy who died on a Roman crucifix gives me eternal life. How does that make sense at all? And so I really wrestled with that. And sometimes my friends would just say, oh, look, you just got to have faith. And I thought, I'm not sure that I want to be a part of a religion that puts my brain at the door and asks me to enter in, to bow down. And so I really wrestled with that one question. And I read some things that were helpful. You know, this one theologian, Alistair McGrath, wrote a book properly titled, What Was God Doing on the Cross? And so there was something helpful there in that book. But I think what really came down to for me, one realization I had was, we all know the typical illustration where if, let's say, a criminal, a murderer, a father decides to take the place of his son, and the judge might say, I'll allow this substitution for life, You can take the death penalty in place of your son, sure, that's one for another, life for life. But how is it that one person, again, Jesus Christ, could take the life of the whole of humanity, the sin of all of humanity? That sounds like that's a big task, one for billions upon billions, unless perhaps this one individual's blood is worth not just the life of another human person, but perhaps that blood is actually divine, and so it has infinite value, not just value for one other person. And that kind of began to put my mind at ease. That actually began to make sense of how one person's blood, if it is in fact divine. So the answer to the question, in my view, is that God, it relates to my prayer life. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I tend to pray to God more as Lord than as Father. And I think that's to my own detriment. I think God actually wants to relate to us as Father. And this is just out of habit. Over the years of being Christian, I've always said, Lord, would you just help me with this? Or Lord, could you help my wife? And Lord, but I think he is Lord. But that's a bit more of a what. That's what he is. He's sovereign over the universe. But I think he loves to be called Father. I'm not a dad. I do have a dad. Torah is recently experiencing that as a first time, and many of you know that joy. But I think God too experiences joy when we relate to him as someone, as Father, in addition to his being Lord. So I do believe he's interested in a personal relationship. And I think that personal relationship is made possible because of this odd thing, so to speak, that happened 2,000 years ago that actually made that funny English word atonement, which actually comes from the words at one-ment, that we can actually be one with God because of what Christ has done. And so that's my view of how a personal relationship is possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So in Islam, who God is, we understand it through what we believe to be His words, which is the Quran. So we believe that this book is the words of God. He is speaking to us through that. It's not the interpretation of any individual, not even our prophet. Rather, these are the direct words of God speaking to all of mankind. And in it, it's very clear that the purpose of the faith is to establish this relationship between him and the individual. And by doing that, it makes this relationship. So God is someone who we can relate to, we can experience, we can love, we can worship as well. And the method that is used in the Quran is by what we call his beautiful names and attributes. He has names. God describes himself as the most merciful, the Almighty, the most compassionate, the all-wise, the all-knowledgeable, etc., etc. Now, God is infinite. These names and attributes aren't limiting to him, but rather they give us a bridge in which we can relate to God, because we can experience knowledge, we can experience wisdom, we can view and observe mercy and its effect. And we are told that God loves those, he's merciful, he loves those who show mercy. God is knowledgeable, he loves those who learn and seek knowledge. God is wise, he loves those who apply wisdom in their daily lives. So there is this relationship going, and the expression of that, at least from our end, is through worship. And the foundation of worship is love. A person, in our faith, we prostrate, we put our head on the floor at least, or we're obligated to at least 34 times a day, right? Well, no one's going to willingly put their head down for something or someone unless they truly love that thing or that individual. So that is who God is in Islam in a nutshell. It's about learning who God is through his own words himself, and then how we can apply that in our own daily lives.
Thank you all. Thank you. The next question has to do with maybe an inquirer who comes to you and says, it's all very interesting. We have heard today of wonderful, true personal stories. We've heard a lot, and I really love it. I love that you are talking about the applicability of what you're talking about. How do you apply this? How do you live it? But if somebody says, but how do I, of all the choices out there, You talk of the Quran, the Bible, the Torah. You talk of the ancient writings of the Buddha and Buddhists. You talk of the great writers, the Veda, the Vedantic writings, etc. And they say, how do you know they're true? How do you know they're right? What evidence do you have? And is it just faith? Is it experience? Is it research? Is there some testability to what you have proposed and what you believe? And I'd like to hear your response to that question, please. So think of a person who's inquiring, but maybe he's 18, maybe he's 88. Maybe she's 40 and a mom and says, I don't have time to do a lot of research. I'd like to know, though, if I strike this path, I want to know, is it true? How do you know it's true? How would you answer that question? Tariq, let's start back with you.
Sure. So our religion is centered around the Quran, which is, again, as I said, the Word of God, as we believe. The argument that's used is what I call the prophet argument, meaning a prophet who is a representative of God goes to his people and says, I am a representative of God, I'm a messenger of God, and he tells you to worship him alone. Now, obviously, we don't expect okay, we hear and obey. They're going to say, well, what's your evidence? So each prophet was given a miracle. Moses was given the stick. Jesus was given the ability to raise the dead and heal incurable diseases, etc. And then we believe our prophet Muhammad was given the Quran. That is his miracle. And the Quran challenges each and every person to study it. To study it, look into it, and look into the concepts and challenge it. It really saying, challenge this book, and then go from there. Now, a mother might not have the time to do that, so what's the crux of it? The Quran is centered around the concept of monotheism. There's nothing worthy of worship except God. God the creator, the one who created everything. And then it goes into the next life. There's an afterlife. There's a day of judgment. We will return to God, and then there's paradise, and there's punishment for whoever, went against the prophets, etc., etc. This is the essence. It goes back to the Quran, and we can use other arguments, call out to God, right? But we got different results. Richard called to God, he found Christianity. I called to God, I found Islam. Well, how can we go from there? It really is about the research. If someone truly cares about knowing the truth, part of the wisdom of finding truth is actually searching for it, because truth isn't something simple. A religion isn't something that you just, put it on the side as a secondary part of your life. It's meant to be the primary focus of your life. You center your life around the religion. So by having this experience of searching for the truth, it essentially embeds truth in the heart. It makes it something that this is important to me, and I am willing to sacrifice time that maybe I don't have in order to find it. So our argument is going to be the Quran itself, the book. Here it is. Look at it, study it, research it, and challenge it, because it challenges everyone. And the main challenge is bring something like it. Can you bring a book? If this is the Word of God, by default, it's going to be perfect. So bring something better than it.
Good, thank you. Dr. Park, before we start, I'm just looking at the clock. I know this is you've been so excellent at summarizing, but to make sure that we get through all people, all the four remaining, we have about 2.5 minutes per person. Okay? No problem, right?
Yeah, got it. All right. So how would I suggest to someone that this might actually be true? I think just 2 ways, maybe a minute on each. Subjectively and objectively. So I think I see some people setting their timer on this. Okay, that's subjectively. I honestly believe that God answers prayers. I've seen it in my own life. I had a $25,000 tuition that I needed to pay at Oxford my 3rd year that I wasn't going to be able to do because my family business went south because of the recession, the minor recession. I wrote a little bit of a support letter asking some friends and family if they would consider supporting us. We raised about $3,000, so we were 22 short. And I remember thinking, we're driving by the countryside of there in England, and I was looking out the window of my friend's car thinking, we're going to have to go back to SoCal. when you leave the place where you do your doctorate, oftentimes there's a high attrition rate, so you end up quitting. And so I thought, I'm not going to finish my doctorate. My mom on the phone told me, son, that God called you out to Oxford. He's going to take you there, bring you back with a degree. It'll all work out. And I said, there's $22,000 that says that that's not going to work out. This gentleman that I met in London once, who was actually much younger than I am, randomly, still to this day, I'm not sure how he got a hand on that support letter. But he and I were chatting, and he said, hey, we were chatting online. He said, hey, I understand you have some need. Maybe we can help support. And I was trying to ask without asking, how much it might be. So I asked questions like, well, how do you plan to send the money over, And he said, I thought we'd just do a wire transfer. Okay, around when do you think this might happen? I'm trying to ask without asking. And he said, well, anytime, when do you need it? And I said, okay, can I just ask without being too forward? We just need to know, will this make, so can I ask you how much you might? And he said, well, no, we thought we'd cover the whole of it. So he covered $22,000. I met him once. He's a stranger to me, essentially. And I believe that was an answer to prayer. So many other things that we can get into with the time, but that's the subjective side. And perhaps others of us have had experiences of God in subjective ways, whether it's a vision or an answered prayer. But objectively, the Apostle Paul, writing in the first century, to the Corinthian church, wrote that if this is not true, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, let's honestly all just go to the beach on Sundays. Let's have a lot more time to ourselves on Sundays and other days of the week. Let's just reckon with the fact that either this is historically true or we're just believing a story. It's a nice story, but it's just a story. So is it story, or is it actually history? Is it factual, or is it something that just gives us good feelings? It's great that it gives us good feelings. Subjectivity matters, relationship matters, but factuality, is this actually the case that Christ rose from the dead? Because if he didn't, this is all in vain, Paul says. If it is the case that he did, then it's worth investigating. So that's how I would invite someone to consider.
Thank you.
I mean, I think, if what we're speaking about, again, is kind of the most fundamental source of reality of life, then the question has to be a deeply personal one for me, which is, what drives my life? What do I live for? In a really immediate and embodied way. And without question, it's love. It's love. That's what I live for, the love with my family, with my friends, with my community. That it's not an emotion that I'm talking about, a feeling, but a reality of how I'm connected and obligated, and it's what I live for. It's the deepest truth. This deepest truth, God, love, it's the same thing. It's the thing that holds the universe together. It's the thing that makes our human lives worth living. There was a really interesting debate around the first century in putting together the canon for the Bible that the rabbis had. Which books are in, which books are out? One of the books that was being heavily debated was the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. Song of Songs, if you know this book, it's a book about love, and it's very sensual, and it's very connected, and it's filled with yearning. And the debate was, how can we make this part of our holy canon, because it's so sensual and embodied in love? And Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages, a contemporary of Jesus, said, the Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, is the Holy of Holies. It's the Holy of Holies. It's the deepest of the deep. This is what living the presence of love in our lives is, how not only we know God, but how we bring God into the world.
Thank you.
So the Buddha would say, don't take anything that I teach you as absolute or truth. You need to find out for yourself through your own practice through your own experience whether these teachings are true for you. So we pretty much say, find out through your experience. And in the practice of meditation and the teachings, one develops a greater sense of tranquility and ease and peace and equanimity, meaning that you're able to be with things as they are with balance and not get lost in what we call the winds of life. This good fortune, bad fortune, sickness, health, praise, blame, wealth, disrepute. You know, one day everybody's applauding you and loves you, and the next day they're criticizing you, and you're finding your way to stay in the center. So these are the ways we know, or I know, that the practice works. And certainly neuroscience and Buddhism, there's quite a bit written of, and there's a great book, Why Buddhism is True. But neuroscience is really talking about the benefits of meditation and why it's good for the brain. And some of the Buddha's teachings, we say the Buddha was the first great cognitive behavioral therapist, right? So a lot of his teachings about the mind, the nature of reality and your perception are being validated by neuroscience and very much aligned with some of modern psychology today. But the invitation is find out for yourself through practice.
Thank you.
How would you respond to someone who's inquiring about the divine to be true? Because it makes you free. Truth makes you free. And we are all invited to be free in our life, to express our divine, our divinity. So we do that by the transformation of our personality. By accepting our divineness, our divinity, we admit unity in diversity. And by practicing these moral values and most ancient principles, we transform our life and our personalities into better human beings. The more you do that, you expand in oneness and you experience God and the divine. The more positive you are in your life, the more efficient you are when you worship God in everything. It's got to be true because it's a matter of experience. You experience that in your daily life. You feel that. When it comes to the teachings, theoretically, sometimes we can click with them, we can question them, but there are three ways, basically, to approach this. One is direct experience. I have the experience, or have I had the experience of the divine in my life, therefore I tell you this is true, right? Not many have that, so it's hard to experience that. And the second one is inference. It's got to be something somewhere, somehow, how this entire universe happens to be. It's got to be a creator, it's got to be a God. The third one is the trust in the teachings and words of world teachers who actually experienced the divine in their life. And this is mostly what we are all invited to be human beings and make use of our intellect and our reason, and to make sense out of this. If someone who has experienced the divine is telling me that we are divinity, that we are divine, if someone who has experienced the divine is telling me the way to get there, I should be smart enough to trust. That's how I would respond to someone.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you so much. I knew time would go very fast. And if you think that's fast, the Q&A time probably will go much quicker. But maybe another round of applause for the panelists as you think of your questions. You've all been wonderful.
Thank you,
Dr.
John.
Jenks.
Thank you, panel. We're going to have a time for questions and answers now. I don't know about you, but the question, do the religious agree about God? What a great question. And my eyes have been opened by seeing 5 wise people up here share their perspectives. I've learned by just listening. I had perceptions of Hinduism, Buddhism, like Don was saying. It's been a great time, Don, hasn't it? Yeah, I really appreciate that. We want to have a time for questions and answers. This is obviously one of those topics that can be very, I just want to say this, we just want to show respect towards our guests. So it can be possible, you might disagree with people, and that's okay. But let's just ask questions with respect, and I'll just let's see, I have a question right over here to start out with.
I just wanted to say everyone refers to God as him. What if God is a woman?
Con, do you want to moderate that? Who answers what?
That's a great question. I get that question a lot, by the way. And I don't know, would any of the panelists like to take that question? It's a great question. Yes, Tariq.
So in our faith, God isn't male or female. He's not a human being, and therefore he's not subjected to our genders and our biology and physiology. Rather, he is referred to as he because in the Arabic language, at least what it was used back then, there was no it. You refer to it as he. So there is no biology in God. God is not like a human being in any aspect, and therefore the usage of he is simply because that's how it was used back then. That's it.
Anyone else to that question? We'll have one more respondent, and then we'll have another question.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm very comfortable here because in our tradition, from the world point of view, we say that God is feminine. The feminine aspect of God. God is experienced in our hearts as a mother, the love of a mother. If we ever experienced our mother's love intensified, that's the experience of God in our heart. So that's number one. Number two, in our tradition, we practice our spiritual life a lot through symbols. And all these powers that are required to tackle, to get rid of our limitations, starting from our ego and our identity, me and mine, is through the power of all these ancient goddesses that have so many arms. I don't know if you have ever seen these images. These are all symbols that represent different aspects or powers of God, mostly symbolized in women's form or shape. So God is beyond gender. But if we have to get hold of a symbol, in this tradition, in the Hindus have embraced or the idea of God as a mother a lot.
Thank you. We're going to have lots of questions I'm sensing here. So let me just go through right over here, right? Lady in white, yes.
I'm Jewish, so I know Rabbi Akiva. I understand. People have told me freedom of choice. My question is, if there's a God, how could the Holocaust have happened? And is it possible that God can make mistakes? And this stands for all the other Pol Pot and all the other things that have happened.
Rabbi, would you?
Sure. So I think I just want to honor that your question it's one of the most painful questions. It's one of the things that makes it, I mean, if we want to really be honest, and we really, whether there are people in here who have directly experienced or had family members that were in it. It doesn't really serve at all to make some kind of whitewash statement like there's a reason and purpose behind all of it, or all of the things that we use to kind of preserve God in some way. So, you know, I think part of when I look at what's the response that we can have that's an honest one is purely, I don't know. I don't know. And really, when it comes down to the reality of God as kind of one of the themes that I've been articulating this morning has been, I don't know. It is this mystery. As soon as I go ahead and say that I know, like I know who you are, or I know who my spouse is, or I know who God is, or I know why this happened, I'm just projecting on something that's happening more inside me. So when I think about where is God, whether it's in the Holocaust or it's here and now, I look and I see God was in those righteous Gentiles that were stepping forward, that were trying to, God was in the forces that were trying to defeat Hitler and Nazi Germany. God was in all of this unfolding that is trying to bring some kind of goodness to a horrific situation. And God is in the pain and the grief and the heartbreak and the wailing that is a part of all of it. So I can only be able to respond to where I experience God showing up. As far as the mind of God or why this had to happen, I don't know. And I would be very hesitant to really hear any response of anybody who would presume to have an answer to that.
I'd like to chime in just a bit on that if I could. And I wholeheartedly agree with all of what Rabbi Kavod had to say on that. I might just add one or two things. It was Dostoevsky, wasn't it, who said that the joy of the whole world isn't worth the cry of a little child. And there's something about that, right? Even that one evil going on in the cry of a pained child outweighs all the joys that the world has to offer. Sometimes we feel that way when we see someone in pain like that, our own children or our own grandchildren. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, another Russian thinker here, but he said something very fascinating. He said, if only it were that simple, if only we could take all those who are evil and put them somewhere and destroy them. But the line that cuts through good and evil cuts through the heart of every human person. So there's evil in us as well. And so we are just as much a free will, and human depravity explains a lot. Not everything, but it does explain a lot too. But the last thing, there's a Christian theologian by the name of Jürgen Moltmann who wrote a book called The Crucified God. And his theology of the cross basically says that we can't, Christianity doesn't offer an explanation or a solution to the problem of evil. But it does tell us that Jesus, one of Jesus' names is Emmanuel, God with us. So he is with us in the suffering. So Christianity doesn't solve the problem of evil, but it helps us to bear it well. And I mean, we all, I'm sure, could share a little bit of our own story. And my wife and I have been going through a struggle of our own deeply for the past 8 years that's been really difficult. And the only answer to any hope is that God is with us in it. We don't know why things are taking so long. We don't know why this or that is happening in our lives, but we do know that God is with us in the suffering. And this is why I look to the crucified God as something of honestly speaking, a crutch or something for us to get by in life with, is that he is with us. And that is the assurance that we have. It's hard to hold on to him or her. It's hard to hold on to God. But even then, God is holding on to us. And so that's my 2 cents there.
Thank you very much. There's another question right over here. I see you right there, too. Just right over here. Yep.
I realize it's probably not. I realize it's probably not be able to to answer this, but the one question I wanted to know today was what the different religions believed about what happens when you die.
Gotta get in there.
You know, I tell you what, I think I'm going to challenge you all. Each of you say something. This is an elevator answer. You're on the elevator, and somebody says, oh, you teach Buddhism, or you teach Hinduism, and you only are going 3 floors. What happens when you die?
Well, that's a fundamental question, meaning in reality, we have to say, we don't know. Is that a mystery? Well, yes and no at the same time. It's because it's in the field of what we call the adrishta, the unseen. We can't see it. All we know is what we are here and now, what we experience through our senses. That's all we know. The rest is up to what we will experience later.
The elevator door just dinged. Thank you. Did you have one more thought?
Go.
The Buddha talked about karma and rebirth. Complex, cannot answer it in a short period of time. It's not reincarnation, like a soul goes to another soul. Rebirth has to do with interdependence, that something of your karmic energy gets reborn. Some Buddhists believe it, others do not. It remains a mystery to me personally. It's the closest I could get to it.
Thank you so much.
The question of what happens after we die is completely linked to the question of who are we. If we think that we are only a body, then when we die, that's it. If we think that who we are is not just physical, but there is another life force aspect in us, some people call that soul as a way to try to speak to what that deeper reality is, then we know that it doesn't end at death. Who we are doesn't end. And our mystical tradition has lots of really interesting ideas about reincarnation, about what happens, but for the most part, the fundamental piece is the journey is not over.
I believe that no amount of human wisdom will yield information on that because we've not been there and back. But so what we need is external revelation, revelation from the divine. And so what the Christian scriptures teach, I believe, is either eternal separation from all that which is beautiful and joyful and good, namely God, or eternal union, a very long party of joy and beauty and goodness in the presence of God.
Our revelation of the Quran is quite vivid on what happens after death. Our existence continues, and there is paradise and there's punishment as well. Why is there punishment when we claim that God is all-loving? Well, it's to motivate us. When we feel accountable, it motivates us to work harder. That's the point. The point isn't punishment is there because God is out to get you, like a cop, waiting for that person speeding, but rather to motivate us to work even harder. The belief in the next life is the second pillar of faith. And to be honest, in my own research, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to understand God and his decisions, right, going back to the Holocaust, without understanding that there's a next life. That life is eternal, this life is temporary. And it is crucial in our faith to understand that and to consider it as a factor in our decisions in our lives.
Thank you very much. I see a question right here in front.
I've listened to 5 educated people sit next to each other and appear to be respecting each other's differences in God. If that's so here, maybe the people who are teaching these religions could teach their parishioners, or whatever you call them, to respect the other people's views instead of having all these wars and these shootings and the anger And do you think that's a possibility?
I'm really impressed with the interfaith movement, and I would encourage everyone to look for and participate in interfaith gatherings. I just find these gatherings to be illuminating, filled with love and respect. And I learn so much from each person from teaching from faith. When they come together, you can see underlying universal truth that's present in all different walks of life. And the love in the room when you're with people from the mosque and from the temple and from the church, and it's really a wonderful experience. I'd encourage you to participate and support this movement of interfaith.
I'd like to say something to that too, real quick. When I was on the board of a group called the Alliance for Spiritual Community, I was asked to lead a monthly discussion group with clergy and leaders from the religious community here in South Orange County. And I said, well, why don't we talk about God? And they said, oh, we can't do that. That's too divisive. We're too good of friends to do that. And they were concerned that it would jeopardize their relationship. So we talked about topics like community and love and hope and patriotism and country, that sort of thing. Finally, 12 months, they turned to me as a group and said, before we just talk about this, I could just say, this has kind of gotten boring. It's not engaging enough. I said, well, why don't we talk about God? And they said, yes, let's talk about God. And so we did. But there's some fear involved. Can we really talk about God and be friends? And I think you've seen that we can. And I think it starts where you are, with your neighbors. It starts in your home, with that sense of kindness and listening. I want to hear your story. Doesn't mean that I have to agree with you. So thank you for the question.
We have a question up here in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is, do you believe in Sharia law?
Yes, I do. But what is Sharia law?
Well, I've studied Islam, and there's parts of it that I don't like.
Sure. But talking to the general audience, is Sharia law what Fox News gives us, or is it what the scholars of Islam say it is? Sharia law is essentially a way of life. It includes legal aspects, but also includes social aspects. For example, smiling in the face of a fellow human being is a charity. That is part of our Sharia law. Charity is part of our Sharia law. Making sure our neighbors aren't hungry while we are, full. That's part of Sharia law. Being respectful to all faiths, engaging with them. That's also part of Sharia law.
I just wanted to say, in connection to that, I've done a little bit of work in this for my doctorate, but out of the 6,200 ayah or verses in the Quran, less than 200 actually have to do with any sort of legal punishment. Most of it has to do with moral admonition and a way of getting along with neighbor. And so I believe in Sharia law to that extent. I think because it just means religious freedom. That's what it really means. And in the whole of the Quran, there's only one verse in the entire Quran that talks about Sharia, and that's in, if I remember correctly, 45:18. So that's Surah 45, chapter 45, verse 18. And it talks about it as the way of God, the moral way, a way that's away from the pagans at the time who believed in just following their whimsical desire. And so I really do believe that respecting religious freedom, obviously provided that there's no harm involved in it, is not just a way to respect Muslim. I think it's, well, I'll speak for myself, I think it's a Christian way to live in a peaceable society, which touches on the earlier question here. I had a friend in Oxford, I won't name him. He was actually being trained to be the next Grand Mufti of Singapore. Well, that might give him away a bit, but he's a good friend. We're the exact same age, and interestingly, during his time at Oxford, he was studying the Abrahamic faiths, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we just got along really well. He was going through SAD, seasonal affective disorder, and the English winters are very rough. But we connected on an emotional level, and as we got to know each other, our wives are also exactly the same age, and so we spent a lot of time together. And after one cold night, we were at their place for dinner. He offered to drive us back, and as soon as he turned on his car, there was Justin Bieber playing on the radio. And I looked at him and I said, "You listen to Justin Bieber?" And I was kind of making fun of him for doing so. Y'all know who Justin Bieber is, right? Okay. But, he's a great guy. And apparently he's probably a Christian recently. Anyway, so off of that, I won't name him, but my friend and I, we just realized that, we realized that we can just be friends. There's so much more that we share in common. And as Reverend Don Barkley just said, it really does start with our neighbor. It starts by showing other people that we can be friends, even though we have deep differences. We can dialogue about those differences as we should about Sharia law and all the rest. But we should do it in tones that are friendly and civil and caring. To this day, he still claims that song was put on the radio by a CD from his son, not himself. I don't believe him. But anyway, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I have a question right down here in front.
What do the wisdom of the tradition say about how to have an experience of God?
I can take that. So the most profound in my own research is supplication. That God promises in one way or another, now there are different ways he responds, that whoever calls upon him will find an answer, one way or another. What that answer is, it might not be exactly what you asked for, or it could be exactly what you asked for. So I always encourage my congregation to do a lot of supplication, because you will start seeing that manifest in your own life, and that's quite powerful. And as Richard was saying, when you're supplicating God, asking him, help me pay my tuition, and you see that, there's nothing more that can point you to God than that. Another way the Quran, or another method the Quran utilizes is nature. Look at nature. Look at how God created everything, because that tells you a lot of who the author is. So look at the beauty. We see a lot of beauty here in SoCal. The one who created that is much more beautiful. And look at the amazing information the universe provides us, all this knowledge. Thousands of years we've been studying the sky, yet we know so little about it. Well, the one who created that is one of knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you. And Swamiji, did you want to have something?
Sure.
Yes,
I think the answer to that, how to have an experience of God, is it all depends on the degree of your longing. If you long for God, you are creating a longing in God for you. And that grows and grows and grows. The more you long for God, the more God expresses himself through you. The problem is, do we have that longing? Do we want that? Do we want that experience? We all love distractions, and that's it.
Our Judaism, really the way that we experience God is through loving action. It all comes down to what we do, and really serving people, feeding people, being able to, smiling at people, holding open the door, being civil, being respectful. All of these things, I want to encourage that we can have this idea of God as being something that's distant, that's out there. What kind of experience, what's the idea we have in our mind of what this experience of God looks like? And what I want to suggest is it is more immediate. As it says in the book of Deuteronomy, it's closer to your mouth and to your touch than you can imagine. So it's something that we experience all the time. But a lot of the time we don't give as much of our heart to the impact of what our action can be. So the invitation, I think our tradition invites us, is to see all of these basic acts of loving action. The word that we have in our tradition is mitzvot, is acts of loving action, that these are the pathway to God. These are the expressions of God. And if we can be open to it in that way, simple, easy things, can we be open to it as expressions of God? How will that change our experience of those simple things? Bringing home flowers for our spouse. Simple things. All of those, and to look at that not just as giving flowers, but I'm engaging in a sacred action. I am expressing God's presence in this moment. How does that change your experience of that?
Wendy,
I would
please.
like to add something that, this awakening, we would say, is an invitation to let go of your concepts, your ideas, your thinking, your intellectualizing, who we take ourselves to be, and just, sit with the bare truth, with what's in front of you. Still the mind, go to nature, watch your breath, and drop into the heart, and practice the love of all beings. And in that place, we find what maybe other people here are defining as God, but will from where I'm sitting, a great wisdom, a great truth of who we are.
We have one final question here in the back.
I just want to thank the panel for introducing us to the various faiths and how they arrived to their faith and the belief in God. Each one of us comes, and as the rabbi said, love, doing unto others. That's what each one of those religions teaches you. And if you follow those concepts, like Micah says, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. We're never going to know everything about God. But when you see, like you said, you see the beauty in the nature of God, you see the beauty in a child, you see the beauty in the elderly, you see the beauty in certain things, that is probably God. Why does a word like Holocaust happens? Holocaust happens when man goes and follows the wrong leader. That's how Holocaust happens. And it could happen at any time. And when you go to war with people, it isn't that God said you to go to war to that person. It's because your leader told you to go to war to that person and to hate that person or to enslave that person. It's the leaders. And if you want to follow the wrong leader, this is what's going to happen. And what happens after you die, nobody knows. Just do good here.
Well,
Amen.
thank you so much.
Amen.
Let's give a big round of applause to Don and the panel. They've done a great job raising an issue. I'm going to add, I've got an announcement to make. Gate 3 in the future is closed. From going on forward, you have to get into Gate 1 on El Toro or Gate 2 on Paseo de Valencia. Remember that for next time. We just had a great time this morning. I hope you've come to a different understanding, perhaps. We didn't just learn something. We learned about how to think about something, how to approach the subject. I think these people are good models. Some of you want to talk to the panelists. They'll be down at the front to talk with you one-on-one if you'd like to do that. And what else can I say? Come to my wedding. Have a great day.